It is my pleasure to introduce the person who will be chairing this afternoon session and telling you more both about our distinguished visitor, Professor Harding, and the work that generates from it. Dr. Sarah Bracke, one of our bright lights and one of our Marie Curie postdoctoral fellows, who has spent a sizable amount of time studying as well, working with Professor Harding at Santa Cruz. Sarah Bracke's dissertation on women who reject fundamentalism, as it was called then, secularism, and fundamentalism, actually it's more effect that Sarah rejected fundamentalism by studying women who rejected secularism. But that dissertation really was an agenda-setting exercise in our program, and it has prompted endless discussions on religion, brands of fundamentalism, of various forms of the unmentionable term which we have banned since, and has played a role in generating this lecture series on secular, post-secular, proto-secular, anti-secular. A great pleasure to have her chairing this afternoon, Sarah Bracke.
Okay, so good afternoon everybody and welcome. And so it's also my pleasure to welcome you to this final session of our post-secular seminar series of this year, of the first year, organized by the Center for Humanities and the BAC. And maybe just a brief word about the whole series. We began this post-secular series in November, and the we here, okay, let's maybe put the people visible, so the we, Rosi Braidotti, Bolette Blagart, Eva Midde and myself, and Peter van der Veer, who could not be here because he's in China, right? Yeah. And so we began in November, last November, and we had speakers on the connection between Europe and Christianity, historical perspectives and ethnographies of women in Catholic and Jewish traditions, a session on Reform theology in Islam, feminism and a session on feminism and post-secularism, on secularism, and on multiculturalism and religion in Europe, kind of, yeah. And so today we will leave a focus on Europe behind and we cross the Atlantic, and we will hear a lecture about evangelicals in the US by Professor Susan Harding. So Susan Harding is a professor at the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and she has done extensive field work, ethnographic work about the cultural movement that swept through many of the conservative Christian communities in the US during the 80s and the 90s, converting those from marginal and anti-worldly separatist people into a visible public vocal force. And so in 2000 she published her seminal book called The Book of Jerry Falwell, Fundamentalist Language and Politics. And currently she is working and writing, I mean we will hear some of that this afternoon I guess, on figures and texts and media events and movements and other kind of practices that are revoicing the religious rights. Now we will all learn about what revoicing means. So that are revoicing the religious rights and socially conservative Christianity in the US. Now Susan's work has been very inspiring to me and to many of us. We also have the masterclass tomorrow, and I see that some of the, or most of the participants of the masterclass are here as well. So it has been inspiring to many of us, and I briefly want to say something about why that is the case for me, at least. Susan is an astute observer and ethnographer, and an anthropologist who is able to make sense of transformations as they take place here and now, as we live them. And in a sense, we already had a number of those in the post-secular series. She's yet another thinker of our times and how to think the times we live in. Her work is focused on transformations of religion and of the secular, and for me it has very much made clear that fundamentalism, in its particular context, okay, the F word, right? Fundamentalism as a particular historical movement within US or North American Christianity, that fundamentalism has not only always been inside of the modernity of North American society, and this is kind of a way of thinking against situating religious revival as a return to the past. So it not only has been inside of the modernity of North American society, but it has also helped to produce that modernity. It has actually been part of precisely a secular contract and the lines that are drawn in the secular contract. And that secular contract has relied on a fundamentalist collaboration, we could say. And if you want to know more about it, read the great book. So then, just to end on a more personal note, for me it's also a great pleasure to have Susan doing the closing lecture of the post-secular lecture series, because Susan has also been a supervisor and a dear friend when I was living and working in Santa Cruz, California. And since the end of this post-secular lecture series also coincides with my Marie Curie fellowship, which began in Santa Cruz, it kind of is drawing this nice little circle or spiral to have Susan here today. So the program for this afternoon is that Susan will first give us her lecture, and depending on time we will then take some questions or we have a break, and then the second part of this afternoon, which usually we do this in a really seminar setting, right? The setting today is a bit different, but especially for the second part of this afternoon, we hope to get that same kind of seminar atmosphere in which we just ask questions and engage in discussions and exchange. And for this very final session on the post-secular series this year, we might actually at the end have a more clear idea of what the post-secular actually means. Okay, so with this, I ask you to join me to welcome Susan.